I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Dejan Eskic. He is the Director of Research and Education with IHA Innovations, and he is also the Senior Research Fellow at the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute. So he's going to give you a couple stats, and thanks, Dejan.
Let's go. Okay, good morning. Thank you for coming to the University of Utah. See some new faces, some familiar faces. How many are you out of Utah? Okay. How many are you from Idaho? Okay. I usually make a joke about Idaho, but I call it Northern Utah. It's nice to follow a couple of architects, a fellow Croatian. There's another, I'm usually the token Croatian guy. Now there's two Croatians in housing in the US, so we're going to have to box out a little bit. It's getting tight up here. This is a very important topic, obviously, and I want to set the frame for us as we get deep into codes and construction methodologies, but I don't want to be doomsday Dejan. Somebody started calling me that in class the other night, but I feel like we kind of have a clock, and it's a demography clock. It moves like a glacier, it's slow, and then it hits us. Okay, so over the next 20 years, we have about 16 million new households are forming, okay, between 2020 and 2040. So just to keep the current status quo in housing supply and demand, we need to basically build 16 million more housing units. And how do we do that on the back of everything? So I just want to put that into perspective for us, and not that you guys don't feel pressure, but keep up the momentum in a very crazy world. We put out our fifth year innovations report back in May, I believe, and we went through just the landscape of how did we get here. Everybody's aware of where housing prices are, where rents are. So this chart right here, if you look at the yellowish line and the blue line, the yellow represents the median sales price of an existing home. The blue line is the median asking rent. That dark black line is the average mortgage payment for a new purchase corresponding to each quarter. You can look at, for example, if you look at 2018 to 2021, interest rates dropped so much that if you put 10% down on a median priced home, the mortgage payment actually went down because of those interest rates. So basically, we've had mortgage rates subsidizing wealth creation, for lack of another word, because housing prices increased. And now we get through, April 2022, and we see these skyrocketing mortgage rates. This morning, we're past 8% on the 30-year. So basically, we're at a standstill in the housing market. In the meantime, we keep having to, we got to continue to innovate. We can't stop. When we look at just mortgage payments to the average asking rent, so we look at that ratio. We divide the mortgage rate by the mortgage payment by the asking rent. You can see, for example, in 2012, it was cheaper to buy than it was to rent because the mortgage payment on average was lower than the average asking rent. You could see starting in 2018 through 2021, it was gradually dropping. And again, in 2021, when those rates were 2.75, it was cheaper to buy than it was to rent. And now we're 1.63 times higher on that mortgage payment. And this begs the question, why is it important? Well, it's about wealth creation, access to opportunity, all of those buzzwords that we have in academia. And we look at, what does that access to opportunity look like? So access to home ownership. Right now, majority of Americans are priced out of the median priced home in 2023. Across the country, pretty much every state, more than half of the population is priced out. And in majority of the states, it's over 75%. If you look at, for example, Massachusetts, it's basically pretty much everybody. It's 99.9%. People think about California as being unaffordable, but Massachusetts and New York are much more unaffordable. Going forward, production. So this is why we're here today. If we go back all the way to 1960, we look at that bluish gray line. That's new household formations in tens of millions. So in 1960, we had about just under 10 million new households formed. We started approximately about 14 million homes. So we divide those two, we had 1.5 new housing starts for every one household that formed. Okay, so we had a little flexibility in the market, and basically every decade we had more than one housing unit built for a household formed. Then we get to the great financial crisis, the 2000s, we overdo it, we do 3.1. So for every household that forms, we build 3 housing units. Then the inverse happens. In 2010 through 2019, for every one household that forms, we built 0.8 housing units. And so now the last couple of years, we're outpacing that a little bit. We're finally back to over 1 to 1, but we have a long way to go when we're thinking about 16 million more housing units that we have to meet the next 20 years, okay? And this should say underproduction of housing units by state as well, but our friends from Up for Growth just recently released their 2021 numbers, and every state is behind on housing production. It doesn't matter if you're in the backwoods. I won't offend any state and say they have backwoods. Yeah, I haven't given me permission. The backwoods of Louisiana or the greater Wasatch Front, there's housing under production. We all live this, and it's squeezing out more and more out of our housing prices. If you were to tell me that unemployment at a point in time was going to be 16%, and 2 years later mortgage rates are going to be at 8%, and our housing prices, nothing dramatic is happening to them, it's because we're so undersupplied. We've never had a housing recession during a housing shortage happen. So it gets to efficiency. Ryan talked about, and Ivan, inefficiency in productivity. So if we looked at just residential building construction workers per new housing unit started from 2001 to recently, at the peak of the housing boom in the early 2000s, we had 2.2 construction workers per every unit started. In 2022, it was about 1.6, so that's about a 30% reduction in capacity. But in some states, we've hit record housing unit production in the last 2 years as well. So we're doing a lot more with a lot less, in a way too. Getting to that point though, the scary part here is we're not getting new workers into the construction industry. So if we look at the age composition going back 20 years or so, in 2003, about 11% of the construction workforce was 55 years and older. And those guys, those are your educators in the construction industry. They're passing on the knowledge. Their egos have calmed down. They're a little grumpy, but they want to nurture the new generation. Fast forward to basically now, it's about a quarter of the construction workforce is 55 years and older. We're not getting younger folks. When the median age in the construction industry starts coming down, it's when we really have to worry, because it doesn't mean younger people are entering the workforce. It means the older folks are retiring, and that's why the age is coming down. So production. We need to keep that going, and it's nice that we have HUD here. The federal government is here to help us. I'm just kidding. They told me to get the crowd riled up a little bit, so sorry, Dan. Okay. And this brings us to another challenge. It's in the local sphere, whether it's county, municipal. When I think of this problem, if the Ford Motor Company had to build a car for every state, let alone every jurisdiction, each car would cost $200,000, and it would just be a 4-seat sedan. It would be nothing fancy. So to gain these efficiencies, right? When we look at the regulatory costs of a new single-family home, for example, and it's in which stage of development, whether it's during development, they're in the blue, or during construction, they're in the orange. There's opportunities to make things more efficient, and this is where we kind of have to look at a little bit further to streamline some of these regulations as well. So going forward too, we are, especially here in Utah, our homeownership rate has not dipped below 70%, basically since we started keeping records. So wealth, whether we agree with that philosophical statement or not, is tied up in our homes. So if we look at just median net wealth by tenure, so in 2019, the average homeowner had a median wealth of just under $255,000. If you're a renter, it was about $6,000. So basically their car was their net worth, for lack of a better word. Now, 66% of Americans own their home. It's not a big deal. But the remainder, if we're thinking, younger folks, how do they create that wealth and that access? How do we unlock those opportunities, especially today in such a critical financial environment? So when we look at going forward, the next 20 years, what type of growth is happening? So I said we have 16 million new households that are going to form between 2020 and 2040. If we break out those households formation by age, what stands out is the baby boomers. Okay, so we have the 2020s are about playing housing defense, and we got to figure this stuff out, because I think when we get into the late 2030s, the housing shortage likely goes away because of this demographic shift, because we have so many more older folks. And if we can figure out the type of housing for them, it frees up a lot of existing homes in grade A locations, right? So we got to create an environment that the boomers can downsize and unlock and pass on that wealth as well. Because right now, there's a lot of baby boomers that are ready to sell and downsize, but they have nowhere to go. So I'll leave you with kind of these three thoughts. We're innovating in turbulent times. We're not in a vacuum. It's a hectic global geopolitical environment every day. Financial costs, interest rates. Where do we see that going in the next couple of years? Because that's going to create a major sort of environment for us. And then, housing shortage will persist this decade, but I think we have to think beyond that too. And in the 20s and 30s, it's about meeting that senior housing demand. So, thank you for your time, and I think it's time for break. Yes, let's take a break.